Going to get started. So we are on time, everyone. Welcome to our, what month is it again? September monthly webinar. It is Global Impact Entrepreneurs. Terry Vincent here. Super excited to be able to have you back. It feels like forever. I don't know why it feels longer than usual since we've all been on here, but it does to me. We've got, as the usual, we've got a gift to give away, which is 20 minutes on podcast strategy with Melanie Colling, which you do need to obviously be on the call and stay right through to the end. So I have my team ready and waiting to see who's there at the end. And believe me, you're in for a treat to be able to win that. And I've already had people messaging say, I want to win it, I want to win it. So watch out, there'll be a lot of people coming your way anyway, Mel. But I'd like to introduce the lovely Melanie Colling. We've known each other for a little while now. We've crossed paths, mainly in Bali. We're on our little ventures together in iLab that I have been facilitating for, well, if I had have been doing it now, it would have been close to 70 programs they've done all up, and I would have been close to 40 of those myself. So we've had the pleasure of spending that time and drinking many a gin and tonic together over there. And I'm going to get Mel to introduce herself more than anything, because she's going to do a lot more justice to her introduction than me. But I guess the story that rings true to me the most is the fact that your background was in project management. And quite often that's only a small part of it, and there's a lot more to it than that, funny parts as well in amongst that. But the biggest thing I say to a lot of people, entrepreneurs, is, I ask the question, how many of you has started off in a career that didn't resonate with what you really love and who you are, what you're passionate about? And so many put their hand up. Mel, you're definitely one of those I've got the t-shirt that said, yay, I've done something that I didn't love, but now I'm doing what I love. So over to you, Mel. I'd love you to introduce yourself to our beautiful community.
Thank you, Terry. And hello, everybody. I can see some familiar faces. So that's cool, Sharon and Julie. So hello, everybody. Thanks, Terry, so much for having me. It's really awesome to come and chat to your community and talk all things podcasting. But it wasn't what I started out doing, like Terry said. So I actually started out in corporate as a project manager, which I kind of fell into this world of project management. And I did that for 20 plus years, and, I was quite good. Did a few projects, worked for all the big names like HP and IBM and all those guys. But it was always in the back of my mind, I was always looking for something else. And, I've done some crazy businesses, and, Terry will laugh when I say about, had an online wedding dress business and, like so many random businesses, because I was always looking, going, what am I going to do? And I actually, discovered Wealth Dynamics, and I did my profile, and I first came out as a star. But it was actually Julie on this call who said, are you sure you're a star? Sure you're not a supporter? And I actually did my test again, and I was a supporter, and I read that report and I was like, yes, I am. And Roger always says, project accumulators make good project managers, and I could understand why, but I was a supporter, and how had I done it? And I actually worked out that I managed projects through people. I made sure I had the right people on my team. So I did that for 20 years, but was always on the lookout. So I did various things. I was part of Roger's mastermind. I used to rock up every month. I'd share my updates. And on that call was my now business partner, Brett Jarman, who would give updates on how he was going, and he was doing sales and marketing funnels, and I was doing project management with entrepreneurs, helping them grow their businesses. And we give updates, and we go, oh, Brett's doing well, and he'd go, Mel's doing well. And people would want marketing help, and so I would pass them on to Brett and say, go and see him. And then he'd say, oh, I don't want to manage people, and he would give them to me. We're kind of going like this. And then one day we said, let's just work together. So we came together and did some stuff. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, Brett rings me and says, we should do a podcast together. And I was like, what's a podcast? And it sounds so ridiculous now because everybody knows what podcasting is. But back then it was like, what is that? And he's like, all you got to do is rock up and talk. And I was like, I can do that, supporter here. So that's how it started. We started a podcast. We interviewed Roger as our first person. We did our podcast, then we went on, created our own podcast, and we kind of created this podcast little network and ecosystem through just people coming to us and asking us. So we now have podcast production, we have podcast training, and we also have a podcast booking agency. And I'll touch on a bit of those as we go through and share with you. So yeah, I have been on a bit of a journey, and I did start as a project manager, and now I'm, in my own business doing podcasting. So who would have thought? But yeah, it's been a real interesting journey. And as Terry said, we've had some super fun times in Bali because, part of my way I transitioned out of my full-time role into my business was to go and work over in Bali with iLab and with Terry and the gang. And so I took my family over there and lived and worked in Bali for 7 months. And we had lots of good times. Lots of different stories, but we won't share those here on this podcast, on this webinar. But yeah, so we did that, then came back, and that's how I was able to transition and take that step. And as Roger says, not jumping ship, but it's like taking that little stepping stone. So there's been many of those kind of, stepping stones along the way to get where I am today.
Thanks, Mel. I do, look, the funny story about the wedding dress business, you've got to share that, because to me that everyone in some way, shape or form will relate to it. You saying project management, but then going into something that you go, yes, I'm going to give this a go. This will be it. So just briefly share your little story about your wedding dress business. And you were being mentored by Roger, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Share that. That would be awesome.
Poor Roger. I think he's banging his head against the wall with me and my wedding dress business. So I started this business. I'm like, how do I get out of project and how do I get out of working this full time? So I bought this business off someone else who had started it, and it was kind of an idea, and she'd done a little bit. So, typical, woman and supporter. Oh, I don't like the logo, and I don't like this, don't like that. So I started changing all these things myself and doing the website, and all this took so much time, it's stupid. Changed all these things. Anyway, have a guess how many wedding dresses I sold. Like, just put your hand, just like 2. Keith says 2. Anybody else? 1. Andy says 1. Sharon. Oh, I love you, Sharon. 10. This is how many I sold. 0. It's so hilarious. Like, because I made this whole website, I was like, gotta look, it's gotta look amazing. Anyway, I went to all this trouble, but it just was not a thing a supporter should do. It's an online business, like no people contact. It was all the things I shouldn't have been doing. But the good news was that I actually sold it on eBay for a profit. So it was all good. Like, someone else bought it and they really went crazy with it. And, it was the right person for that right business. And it was just not the thing I should be doing. But Roger was so patient with me. And it's so funny because there's still people in the community today that were on my first calls when I was talking about this wedding dress business. And they still laugh at me and go, that bloody business, we'd get on the call every month and we'd hear you. And, everybody knew except me. And sometimes that is the problem, is that, we think we're on this journey, and we forget to listen to people around us giving that advice. And so, it took me a while, but I did finally realize, and, it was all good. I sold it and I made money, but just wasn't selling the actual dresses. Was selling the business.
Which was a good result in the end. And you also led into seeing where the gaps were. So, being part of Bali and seeing us teaching promotion plans and promotion plan flow leading to purpose-driven projects.
That's right. So I think it was a call after I'd sold it with Roger saying, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Like, that was my thing. That's what I came to iLab number 3 for, with this business. And we kind of had this chat, and he was like, do you still like project management? I'm like, it's okay. I'm quite good at it. I just don't want to do it in corporate. So I did it with entrepreneurs and helping entrepreneurs and small business grow their business. And to me, that made sense. And, it's all around the promotion plans. And that's what when you go to iLab, that's, what you come out with. And so all of these little things kind of all just came together to form that first business. And it was kind of, it was meant to be.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes the journey that, so many need to take, is one thing will lead to another, but we don't want them to do it the slow way, you know, learn it. Yeah, the wedding dress business was about selling a business. It wasn't about selling dresses. You got that message in the end, but you didn't, if you had to learn that a lot earlier, it would have saved a lot of time. But, you know, we always say the lessons that we learn all the way through everything that we're doing. And, you know, even with your you know, promotion plan support, that was very much about taking the people side of it and putting that people side to the process. So you were working with the people. And if we then move into what this whole call is about, which is podcasts, it's like a lot of people do think of podcasts as being, because it's very online, you know, you go on and you're listening into things. And so it's very much for a person that's behind the scenes, as opposed to someone that's more like the more blazy energy, the more visual energy. And yet you've made you know, you're making a massive success out of it. So yeah, just share I mean, I know you spoke about how you and Brett said, you know, spoke about doing the podcast, but how you've actually gone, I'm a supporter. I could make something of this in podcasting. It is more than just how so many see it as, you know, a behind the scenes thing.
Yeah. And it was so interesting because it is all a journey, and it's only from being in action that you can actually make these like decisions along the way. If I had have sat back and gone, oh, you know, this might work, that might work, I would never have known. So I had to jump in and do the wrong business, and I had to, you know, sell that business and then, you know, start something else. And, you know, and that's how, you know, I have learned. The podcasting is really interesting because it started because Brett was doing sales and marketing funnels and trying really hard to get content out of people. So they'd say, yeah, I'll send it to you. And, you know, it's just, people don't sit down and type things and send it. So in the end, he's like, just send an audio file of you talking and I'll transcribe it and then create the content off the back. That then became a podcast. It's like, that is an audio file, that's a podcast. And that's now what we do, is we take the audio file of the expert, we post it as a podcast, we take all the back end from it, or transcribe it and create it into a newsletter, a blog, social media collateral, etc. So we're taking the expert, maximizing their time by them just sending an audio file, and it could be an interview, it could be them sharing content directly to their audience, and then we're creating this ecosystem behind the scenes. They're doing what they do best and what they get paid most for, which is delivering their service in their business. It's not doing all this other stuff that we kind of have to do as a business owner, but it's not the best use of our time. So that's the podcast production. Then it was like, some people wanted to know how to do it. So, you know, those Lord or Steel energies, you know, really want to know the ins and outs and the technology behind what makes a podcast work. So we started putting a training together that people can actually, you know, understand how it all works and do it themselves, because some people just want to do it themselves and learn. So we did that. The way the booking agency come together, which is really where I use my supporter profile, was the people that we had creating podcasts were saying, oh, this guest finding kind of business is taking a bit of time and not really good use of my time and what I signed up for, once you've gone beyond your existing network. And then other people were coming to us saying, you guys are doing podcasting, how do I get on more podcasts? So it organically happened that we were having people asking us, and we're like, well, that's a booking agency. And then that's what we created. And that's the bit that I really love doing. And that's the bit that I focus on, is I'm just connecting two people. I'm connecting a guest and a host, and setting them up so that they can add value to each other and add value to their audience. So, you know, that's really, so it's such a supportive thing. And I finally found, you know, where I fit in the world.
Found your flow. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And that's perfect. I mean, that's what it's about for all of us, is being able to create and maintain, create something, or basically parachute into something that works for us, that keeps us in that flow. So you've got some slides that you would love to share and some content. So let's jump into that. I'll keep an eye on the questions, but just quickly, Sharon said you were iLab 3, she was iLab 4, Leah and iLab 57. I was iLab 7 when I attended. So, but I'll, as questions come up that are relevant to what you're presenting, I'll ask if that's okay.
Awesome. Yeah, so this is interactive. So yes, Terry will share her questions and anything as we go through. So how do we leverage the power of podcasting? exciting. Love talking about this. I do get a bit excited, so bear with me. So I shared a little bit about me. This is just some pretty pictures, really, just to share all that. But this is my podcast. So Business Connections podcast is mine. This is how I get to have a chat with people all the time, which, you know, as a Blaze person, we always love a chat. So podcasting suits me to a T. As Terry said, I've done some work with Entrepreneurs Institute and iLab. So I've been a participant and facilitator and host. Experts on Air is our podcast network. It's our podcast production, booking agency and training. Purpose Driven Projects was my first real business after my wedding dress business, but you know, we've been there. You Are a Genius is a book that came out last year, which is Marie Rizuka, who many of you will know from Entrepreneurs Institute community. So Marie and I just bringing together the different stories of, you know, lots of people in our community of how they found their genius and how they've gone on to use that in their business and how it's changed their life. And that came about because we had heard so many awesome stories of so many different people about how they'd make that change. And, you know, the catalyst was once they'd done their profile and they actually worked out how, you know, they could use that. So that was a really fun project to pull that together. And, you know, I love all those stories in there and sharing that. And again, you know, as we'll go through, podcasting is all about storytelling. So, you know, really talks to all the stuff I love. And down here, and Terry won't know this yet, but this is my new podcast, Let's Talk Project Management. Dun, dun, dun.
Wow.
So that'll be coming out shortly. So one of the questions we always get asked is, how can I monetize my podcast? So we're doing some work around how can you really own a niche through podcasting and monetizing it. So this is our little foray into that. So watch this space for that one. So why podcasting? So did you know there's over 1 million podcasts? My God, and that means there's 30 million episodes. That's huge, isn't it? Like when you start thinking about that. And then I actually was looking for some stats for this slide because they're always changing. So these are the latest ones. It used to be 850,000, but it's just tipped over to the 1 million podcast episodes. If you compare that to blogs and YouTube, so there's 600 million blogs, 23 million YouTube channels, but only 1 million podcasts on Apple. So it's still really young. Even though people know more about it now, it's still really young. So it's, you know, a real opportunity if people jump in and have a go and try podcasting. Even though there are 1 million podcasts, they're not all active as well. So just, you know, when people think, oh, there's 1 million, where am I going to fit in? You know, they're not all active. Some people start a podcast, put it on hold. Some people just do a series. You know, there's many different reasons why they stop and start. But, you know, they're not all active, and we don't really have, you know, that good a stat on how many are active. But again, you know, as we go through, I'll talk about, you know, it's just about finding the right podcast to be on, and there's different ways to do that. But one of the latest stats that came out was that Aussie podcasting revenue is tipped to hit $47 million in 2020. That's just in Australia. It's like $1 billion if you look worldwide for revenue. So there's actually people that are actually seriously thinking of advertising on podcasts now, because that's where the listeners are going. And if you look at some of the stats, social media usage is declining, whereas podcast listenership is increasing. So there's an interesting kind of dynamic that's happening there. This is the state of podcasting. So you actually see, I thought this was quite interesting, that Australia and the US, 33%. So obviously South Korea, big podcasters, Spain and Sweden, but we kind of come there equal with the US. US are a bit more advanced with podcasting, been doing it for a bit longer, but we are really, really catching up, and we're really jumping on the podcasting train, which is awesome. Interesting too is that podcast listeners are loyal, they're affluent, and they're educated. I think that's a really interesting stat, is that the type of listeners that you're going to get to a podcast. Now, people go to a podcast to learn something, and you'll see people are sick of being told what to listen to, being told what to watch, which is why Netflix is really grown because we can choose what to watch and when to watch it. This is similar. We no longer want to listen to radio. We want to choose what we listen to. And there's all different stats around when people listen to podcasts. And obviously social media, you have to be looking at a screen. Podcasting, you don't need to do that. So you'll find people are listening when they're traveling to and from work, when we were allowed to do that. Clearly I'm in Melbourne and still stuck in lockdown. You know, when they're exercising, dropping the kids off, you know, to and from sport, that kind of thing, people can do it while they're doing something else. And, you know, it's kind of the ultimate multitasking tool. But it's interesting that people are actually going to choose what they listen to. They want to learn something. And being loyal is great because they want to listen, you know, to your next episode, etc. And affluent means, you know, if they're the right people, they'll be ready to buy if that's what you want to take your people to. You know, if you're selling a program or something like that off the back end of your podcast. Interesting too that 35% of the people listen to the entire episode. That's really interesting when you think about how many people watch a YouTube video or watch like a video that's on Facebook, like people will jump in and jump out, but an actual podcast episode, you know, they like to listen to the end of that. So that's really interesting that, you know, only 5% just listen to the beginning. So that's the thing. If you can attract the right people, talk about what they want to hear, and podcasting is so cool because you can get your personality across, and that's a really hard thing to do in text. You know, when you're writing something or you're putting something on your website, it's hard to get your personality across. But in podcasting, they can hear you and they can get a bit of your personality. They can make that extra connection. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the listenership there.
I think, Mel, just adding on to that too, is for those that don't want to be on a video.
Yep.
You know, it is a lot easier to be more natural when you're not thinking of even looking at yourself. You know, if you know no one's really looking, but they're listening, it's easier to have that natural conversation flowing as opposed to them, you know, you see, and we've experienced this in Bali when people go and do their videos and they try to be so perfect because they know people are watching them and they think people are judging them. Yeah. But if you took the camera away and they just spoke, it would flow a lot smoother than it does. So podcasting is a good way for people to get their confidence, you know, raise their confidence, I guess you could say.
It's so true. And it's, you know, when someone has a camera in front of them, they think they've got to act a certain way. So it's almost that they've got this persona that comes up when the camera starts. Whereas podcasting, you don't have any of that. It's a conversation. And I think that's a real power of podcasting, is it's a conversation between two people that other people choose to listen to. Like, how cool is that? It's just a casual conversation. It's not a sales pitch. And that's really important in podcasting. You know, we're not selling anything. We're talking and we're adding value and we're giving something to the audience. And we're doing that in a conversation style, and we're able to tell our story and share what we know and our expertise. When you have a camera in front of you, it's almost like this barrier to being more natural, you know, unless you're really good in front of the camera. And, you know, it's so cool. Like, who cares what you wear? You can just have a chat. You know, no one's videoing you. It's like the ultimate.
You can be in your dressing gown breastfeeding your baby. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Leanne asked a question, and you may be going to cover this, but she said, what's the ideal length of a podcast?
Oh, yeah, good question, Leanne. All depends on the type of podcast. And again, it's something that you can play around with if you have your own podcast, because you can watch the downloads and see, you know, what people are listening to and what length of time. But usually the general rule we talk about is if it's an interview with someone, it's usually around 30 to 45 minutes. But in saying that, if you're having an awesome conversation with someone, don't stop. Keep going. You know, people will listen for an hour, even over an hour. But you can also chop that into 2 podcasts, part 1 and part 2, if you think it's too long. So never, ever stop having a conversation if you think there's good content coming out of that, or you've really got an engaged guest. Like, that is just the ultimate. So keep going. If you're just sharing content direct with your audience, as in you talking on your podcast only and sharing some content, it's usually around 12 to 15 minutes is like the ideal time. But again, you can play around with that. And if you just think about when people listen to podcasts, you know, they're traveling or they're exercising or dropping the kids off. So they might say, oh, I've only got time for a 15-minute one. I'll just choose this one for now because I've got a short amount of time. Or I know when I go exercise, I've got at least an hour. So I'll listen to that episode when I've got a longer length of time. So again, having a mix is good too. But again, play around with it. You know, as you do more podcasts, you'll kind of get a feel for, you know, what length of time works for your audience. And, you know, it's different for every audience and every podcast and every topic.
I was listening to one at the gym the other day, and it was saying that I listened to Hamish and Andy, and it was about the world's #1 rated apples. You know, what's the top apple in the world? And I thought, how interesting. I'm quite keen to hear what it is. And, you know, that was really interesting, even though it's sort of irrelevant to a lot of stuff in life. It's things like that they just kept asking questions, and it kept the conversation going. And because it's a podcast, it wasn't like a radio interview where you've only got X number of minutes. So as long as you've got a captivated audience, I think if it's a topic that people are going, wow, I never thought of that. What is the world #1 rated apple? They will listen in anyway.
And that's a cool thing too about podcasting. Well, once you get going and get a bit of an audience, you can always go and ask them, what do you want to know about? Like, what's your #1 question? Or, you know, what content should we cover? Who should I interview? You know, that kind of thing. And then you can kind of get some feedback, you know, from your audience and shape your podcast that way, if that's the way that you want to go.
Yeah, so there are questions. If you're going to answer these, then you can just say that you're going to go through it. When launching a podcast, is there a process? Thinking about how lots of people are releasing their thoughts. Is it about that? And also another one is about, do you always have to advertise a product in a podcast?
All right. So on the first one, how do you launch? There's many different ways you can launch your podcast. Again, it all goes back to the strategy. So why are you podcasting in the first place? What do you want to podcast for? Are you leading someone to a course or something to do with you and you're using it as a top of a funnel kind of process? Are you trying to monetize that? Are you kind of trying to create yourself as an authority in your industry, field or niche? So it goes back to why you're podcasting and your strategy on that question. What was the second question again?
Well, the second one is about when people go in and advertise a product at the beginning of a podcast.
Yeah.
It sometimes gets in the way of the content, people get, really getting into the content.
It's interesting because there's a lot of advertising on American podcasts, and I think Australians are like, we don't like that. I know I don't like it. Like if there's too much advertising, I'm like on to the next thing. I'm like, can't be listening to all that. In saying that though, you know, there's different ways that you can do that, but there's more in integrity or congruent with you. So there's podcast platforms that you can monetize your podcast by putting them on that platform, and they will put advertising on your podcast and you'll get paid for that. But you have no say on what advertising goes on your podcast. So if you're okay with that, that might be a way. But if there's someone that you want to promote that might sponsor your podcast, then you can actually do, it's like a little infomercial, isn't it? Like you see Joe Bailey, you know, this is for Chemist Warehouse or something like this, and she's talking about product, right? But you can introduce that product and talk about it in your own voice. And that might be more congruent way for you to do it. But you will see more and more advertising come into podcasting. But I think you've got to do it in a way that suits you and your audience and that you're comfortable with. So yeah, don't do anything that you think, you know, I wouldn't listen to that podcast because of that. That would be my general rule.
Yep.
Awesome. Should we keep going and we'll...
Yes.
Cool. All right. So why podcasts? So they're a great way to build a genuine connection with your audience. It's a way to get people, they can get to know you and your personality. And so we spoke about that a little bit earlier, but it's about how to make a connection with people listening. It's also a great way to build your brand recognition, authority, and trust, because they're listening to you all the time. If someone likes your podcast, they want to hear from you a bit more, and they like the content, and they like the people that you're bringing on your podcast, they'll wait for your next one and your next one and your next one. So they'll become loyal listeners, which is awesome. And there's so many people listening that it's a great opportunity to, you know, for conversations related to specific industries, to build credibility in a particular niche. So, you know, if you really want to choose that, you know, I don't know, we have a podcast, and I know this, it's so funny, I laughed when Brett told me, but we have a podcast. It's called The Sheep Show, as in SHEEP. It's about sheep. Knew that people wanted to know about sheep, but it's a lady who has is helping people that are first-time farmers or maybe hobby farmers, you know about how to raise sheep and, you know, become farmers because they've never done it before. And so she's the expert in that. She started a podcast. She's going great guns. Like, you know, she's got awesome downloads and, you know, she's going really well. How niche is that? So, you know, if you really want to own a niche, like, you know, go in there and start talking about, bring experts in, you know, that kind of thing. You've actually got an opportunity to create whatever you want to create in the, you know, by doing a podcast. So you can own a niche, you can talk about anything. Like, who knew crime podcasts would be so huge? You know, it's a bit of a worry that, you know, everyone wants to listen to crime stories, but, you know, hey ho. But like, that's the beauty of it. Anybody can start a podcast and talk about anything. So even sheep.
Keith from New Zealand just said, do you have sheep in Australia?
Not good sheep like you, Keith.
No, we never match up to the New Zealand sheep.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of sheep jokes now.
Yeah.
That's so bad.
That's so good, Andy. I love it. All right, so where am I? I've lost my train of thought talking about sheep. All right, so what are the ways to podcast? And I think this is where it comes down to, you know, what suits you, what suits your goals, your business, and your budget. So it's all different ways. Some people think, oh, you know, I need to get into podcasting. I need to start my own podcasting. That is one way to do it. So yes, you can be a host of your own podcast. You can choose what you talk about. You can create your own content, invite, you know, people in, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you can also be a guest on other people's podcasts. And this is the cool thing. And we'll talk about, you know, how you can do that. So you can get all the glory of being on a podcast, but do, you know, a tenth of the work, which is really cool because you don't have to do all the production and organizing. You just rock up and talk, which is super cool. So if you want to host your own podcast, it's an awesome way to share your unique message and content. So it's about you sharing what you want to share. You know, it might be your content that you teach other people. You know, if you're a coach, you can share all that content. You can take your modules and your steps and kind of lead people down a path. Ultimately, what you want to do, if in that case, if you're using a podcast as your top of funnel, is that you want to get them to opt in somewhere along the way to either your newsletter or a free opt-in, get them onto your database, and then you can chat to them and do whatever you like with them on your database. Ultimately, that's how you would position that. The other cool thing is that you can strategically invite guests onto your podcast. And by that, I mean, you know, if there's people doing cool things in your industry, field or niche that you can leverage off, how cool is it to say, hey, would you like to come on? I'd love to interview on my podcast. You know what? I've asked so many people that no one has ever said, no, I don't want to be on your podcast. So, you know, how cool is that? You can go to anyone. The new podcast I'm starting is in project management. Now, I've been in project management for years and years, and I've watched some of these people, you know, they've got books, they're speakers, they've done all this stuff. I reached out to them and thinking, you know, oh, who wants to speak to me? It's not even a launched podcast yet. 99.9% of the people came back and said yes. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like, you know, one person said, you know, I have said yes to many podcasts, Phil, but once you're up and running, please come back to me. And I was like, that's fair. I'll take that, you know. And obviously, you know, he's done that before and spent some time and maybe nothing's come of it. So I will go and reach out to him. You know, you'll be seen as a trusted leader in your industry, field or niche because you're leading the conversation. You're bringing those people together. You know, you're curating the content in that area. You're leveraging your time. So, you know, it's a good way of speaking your content, then you can transcribe that, and using rev.com, for example, can do that automatically. You can create show notes, and then you can take that content and, you know, create into newsletter or blog, social media collateral, etc. All by just speaking on a podcast rather than you having to then type and create those things again. And like I said, curate your own content and repurpose on social media. So, you know, you've got this continual loop. The cool thing about podcasting too is they're there forever. They never go away. Facebook Lives will go, LinkedIn Lives will go, but a podcast is there all the time. And Google loves podcasts. They love the show notes and the text. And if you add it onto your website, Google will pick it up, and, you know, you'll get further up the Google searches and stuff like that. So there's all little, you know, tricks in the background if how you can use podcasts to position yourself as an expert.
Mel, do you need like specific equipment to set up if you're doing...
This is what I have, everybody. This is my free headphones that came with my iPhone.
We can't see you, we can only see you.
Oh, I have my, sorry, I'm holding them up to myself. I have my free headphones that came with my iPhone, and I plugged them into my laptop and I put on Zoom. That's all I use. And I've been podcasting for 2 years. And I've had no problem with that. Like, I don't have a fancy microphone or anything like that. You can definitely go and do that. And, you know, again, you know, I'm not roaming around interviewing people live and that kind of thing, you know, in the field. And there's some podcasts that do that. And for that, you would probably want to get the right equipment. But, you know, if you're doing it at home, you don't need any of that. I think the rule really is, if your audio is good enough that it's not distracting your listener, then it's fine. But, you know, if it's crackly and all that kind of stuff, and you just have to test that with your guest, if you're interviewing someone, that they've got headphones and you can hear each other clearly. You know, if you've got lots of background noise, you don't want that to distract the listener from actually listening to what you want to share with them on the podcast. But again, you don't have to get too fancy. Like, don't worry about all that stuff. That can come later if you're really enjoying doing it and you think it's a good investment. Keep going, Terry.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Mel.
Cool. All right. So the other way is to be a guest. So you can be introduced to new networks and audience as a trusted expert. So how cool is it? You're going on someone's podcast, you know, they advertise the fact that, hey, I've got this expert in such and such who's going to share what they know, you know, to the audience. They're going to promote you. They're going to introduce you. They're going to ask you questions, and they're going to share your episode with their audience. So, you know, already you've got that trust built because the host is introducing you. You're going to leverage their audience and their networks, because they're going to share it, obviously, with the audience who are listening to that podcast, and also their network. So, you know, inevitably, you know, people that have got a podcast are going to share it all over their social media. So you're tapping into their networks. You're going to comment, they'll tag you, you know, and then you can start this whole conversation and get known in those networks as well. You'll be seen as an expert in your industry or niche. So, you know, you're coming on to talk about a specific topic that you know. The more you do that, and the more podcasts that you can be on, and other areas where you can talk, people will be like, oh yeah, I've seen that person before and they're talking about this. And, you know, it's being top of mind. And if you do that consistently, and you're posting on your social media and they're posting on theirs, people are kind of seeing you in all these multiple different places. And they're kind of thinking, oh, that person, you know, they must know something, that like they've been everywhere. You're leveraging the content created. So even though when we said about you having your own podcast, you're creating content, you're actually creating content when you're a guest as well. It's your content. So you can take those show notes and then you can create, you know, content off the back of that, social media collateral, etc. from that. So don't be scared to do that, because it's your content. And it's so easy. And, you know, you don't need a lot of time to do it. It's like, you know, an hour of your time to have an interview, and how much can you then leverage that one interview across multiple places and people. It's really cool. All right. So what do we share on a podcast? What do we talk about? I got this question a lot, actually, like, what am I going to say? But podcasts are conversational, not a sales pitch. So we touched on that before. It's like a conversation between two people. And if you go in with that kind of thinking, is that I'm just going and talking to this host and I'm going to, you know, answer their questions and share what I know, you know, it's kind of a more relaxed style. Some people were saying, oh, I'm a bit scared about, what do I say? Just answer the question, and sometimes the host will send you the questions beforehand. You can create your own questions with some hosts, everybody does it differently. So, don't be afraid just to jump on and have a general chat. It's really easy. You'll be able to share your story. So you let people get to know you. And that's really the beauty of podcasting too, is it's conversation. It's two people getting to know each other, and then other people are listening to that. So don't be afraid to share your story, and you let people know who you are. Be interested and be interesting is really cool. So be interested in your host and their audience. So, before you go on, ask the question like, who is your audience? What do they want to know? Anything in particular? How can I tailor what I talk about to them? Feel free to ask the host those kind of questions. Have a look at where the host is, what their networks are, what they're sharing, who their audience is. And be interesting is around, adjust your message and your tone to their audience. So the more you know about them, the more you'll be able to deliver the right message to the audience. And then, if you do that right, then, they'll see that you get downloads, that host will have your back. They might do more things with you, etc. So, the more you can add value, and it's all about knowing who you're going to speak to. The other thing is around positioning. So, share your knowledge. You're positioning yourself as an expert in that field because that host wants to talk to you about that particular piece of information. And then so important, do your research, know who you're talking to, know the audience, know what they want to hear in the particular way. Listen to a couple of episodes. There's so many times when people have they've just gone on podcasts and they haven't listened to the episode. So some hosts do rapid fire questions, at the end, or they have their standard questions that they ask, or they do a free flowing one, or, there might be different ways or different styles that they have. It's so important to just listen to a couple of episodes before you go on, so you're ready. It's not like, oh my God, rapid fire questions, what am I going to say? And you're on the spot. So you do your research is very important.
I think that if others may relate to this, but I've had a lot of radio interviews where you can get controversial radio announcers asking questions on a certain topic, and you always know what they're going to ask you because it's pre-set, and it's sort of similar to podcast, except for you don't know how the flow of the conversation is going to go with the radio announcer. And if a certain radio announcer is very controversial, it can go in the opposite direction from a very positive spin to a very negative spin very quickly. I think if you've got experience in doing those sort of things, you would handle podcasts exceptionally well.
Yep.
Because it's good. And while I'm speaking, I have another question.
Yes, go.
From Ross. He said, thank you for great info, but he's asking about what we were talking about before we came on, and that was about the charging. So, when it comes to paying or charging for podcasts, how do we determine the price points?
Yeah, awesome. So, we were talking about this before we started, but more and more I'm seeing that people are starting to charge for their podcast. And I think that's really something that you have to determine on a case by case. Is it worth it? What are they actually giving you for that? Are they just trying to monetize their podcast, or is there some value that they're going to provide for you for charging? So, I have paid for some podcasts, and admittedly they've been American ones, because you see more American podcasts charging these days. But from that, I actually got access to a entrepreneur network. So one of the add-ons that this particular host had was that they were part of an entrepreneur network, which went out to 1 million people, subscribers to that network. So to me, that was enough value for me to pay. But if it was just a normal podcast with just some maybe, show notes and some social media collateral, I wouldn't have paid for that. And again, you feel free to say, well, what do I get for that? What value do I get for paying? Why do you charge? Don't be afraid to ask those questions and then make that call. But there's plenty of other podcasts that don't charge. So if you don't want to pay, go find somebody else that's doing it for free. There's plenty of other podcasts. So yeah, if it makes sense to do it, do it. But if you don't want to go down that path, you don't have to. You just find other people that don't charge.
Yeah, it is really determined by that return on investment
Yeah.
that you're going to get. And that's the same, advice to give anyone when you're investing in anything. Make sure that you know what you're getting for the money that you're paying. And, like I was saying to Melanie before, like I would pay for a podcast to be on podcasts if I knew that the outcome would have the potential flow to generate me income for whatever that was. And, and that's the thing is, even if it was someone that seemed fairly unknown, but they had a good following and a good community, I'd pay for it, definitely.
Yeah, and especially if it's in your industry field or niche that you want to get known for. So just imagine, we have been contacted before by people going, I'd like to be on the Oprah podcast.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's nice, but maybe you need a PR company, not a podcast booking agency. But, imagine if you were on the Oprah of your industry field or niche podcast, and they were asking you to pay. Would that be of value to you? And, the answer to you at that stage might be yes, or it might be, no, I still don't want to pay for it. That's up to you. But, is it going to give you, like Terry said, is it a good return on investment? Again, when you're doing your research, is go and find, how big the networks, how often are they connecting with their network? Like, are they active on social media? They might have a lot of followers, or listeners, but if they're not actively engaged with them, then, maybe it's not worth it. But if you know that they're an active and engaged community, like I'll just give Marie Forleo, for example, who runs B School, her community is so active and engaged that, if there was an opportunity to be on her podcast and she'd pay, I'd say yes, because, that's where, my people are hanging out. I'd want to be in front of her audience, and I know that they're actively engaged. If she actually put a podcast out, they'd be listening. That's what you will kind of want to look for.
Perfect.
All right. Keep going.
Yep. Thank you.
Alrighty. So when do we podcast? Now. Like a cheer, isn't it? When's the best time to podcast? It's like yesterday. But now, like, give it a go. Have a go. Jump in, start with being a guest, dip your toe in the water, see if you like it, start your own, just start rambling and talking about sheep or whatever you want to talk about. Like, Keith's putting his thumbs up to sheep. But, just start talking and, you never know where it might lead, but, this is a great time to get in because it's still in its infancy. Keith's making sheep ears. It's still early days. So get in, have a go, have a play around with it, dip your toe in if you want, or go full on, and say, yeah, I'm going to start my own podcast and start talking about stuff. This is about how to be a good guest. We talked a little bit about this, but, if you are lucky enough to be invited onto a podcast or someone says yes after you've gone out and asked them, is, work with their schedule as much as possible. And I know that's not always possible, but, I have got up at 2 a.m. in the morning to be on a podcast in the US because that was the only time they did it at a certain time, and it was a certain day, certain time, and that was it. It was like, well, if I'm going to be on it, I need to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, I was dressed from the waist up and tried to put makeup on and not look like I was half asleep. But, it's like, if you can work in as much as possible, the easier you make it for the host, the better off you'll be. Make sure you provide all the prerequisite info. So a lot of hosts will ask for your bio and image, that's because they want to promote your podcast. So, do that ASAP. They might also have some standard questions on the booking form, like when you go and book in either through Calendly or Acuity or something, there might be some questions that you answer, like make sure you answer those. I've talked to hosts before where some people have on the booking form not filled that in, left it blank, or they've just put links to take them to their website or something where the host's got to try and find the information. It's like, you're making it too hard for them. Like, make it as easy as possible. Give them as much information because they're forming their questions from that. So if you want to get the right content out and have the best conversation, if you give them all this information up front, you'll do that. Add loads of value to the host and their audience. So, give, because people will always remember that. They'll go and find you if they liked what you talk about. They'll go into the show notes, they'll find your links, and they'll go and find out more about you, what you do, and connect with you. always make sure you thank the host for the opportunity. Like, it's an awesome opportunity that you've been given to be a guest. So make sure you go and thank them, after the podcast. Make sure you show up on time, super important, and never cancel. Like I know life sometimes gets in the way, but try never to cancel. Podcasters talk to other podcasters. So you don't want to get a reputation for not showing up. Also important, and this is one of the bugbears of podcast hosts, is that the guests don't share the post and the links afterwards. So they don't promote the podcast episode. So, the whole reason you're on there is, for you to share information, add value to the audience, but also share that you were on that podcast, because that's helping promote the host and what they do. So promote. Make sure you're sharing it on all of your social media networks, and follow up with the host and ask, how did that go? What else can I do to support you? Can I talk about anything else that would help your audience? Create possibility. Like, you've just done the hard bit about making a connection with someone. What else can you do with them? And, there might be a myriad of possibilities that you can do with them after that. There might be joint ventures or joint webinars, or you can add something to their current program. Who knows? You never know until you ask. So how do you get booked on podcasts? So look for hosts that have your ideal audience. So know who your ideal audience is first, like who's your market, who do you want to speak to? Then go and find hosts that actually have that audience. So again, if it's entrepreneurship and business, you don't always have to look for entrepreneurship and business podcasts. It could be that there's a health podcast that's got professional women as their target audience, but those professional women are interested in health, but they may also be interested in business coaching or making the transition from corporate to business or something like that. So, go wider and think a bit broader about, who you can go and speak to and add value. And you might go and add value to them by saying, it's important to look after your health as an entrepreneur as well. And this is what I do and all that kind of stuff. So you can kind of work out how you can, kind of get your message in there by talking about something in their realm, but you're also tapping into their audience as well. So, think a bit outside the box as well. Just reach out and connect with hosts. Like, it's easy to find them if you go and search on podcasts, and there's a whole lot of different podcast search platforms coming up and about, because it's not the easiest to search for podcasts, but it's getting better. But there's usually a website there which takes you to them, or you can find them on social media, and you can usually find a way to reach out to them and connect. Share how you could help and add value. So don't just say, hey, can I be a guest on your podcast? Say, oh, I really liked what you shared on this podcast, and I liked what you talked about that. Like, give them some indication that you're interested and you've listened to their podcast and but and then say, I also think that, you could have talked about this, and I can provide some insights into that if you think that's valuable for your audience. So try and find a way that's easy for them to say yes. I was on a podcast recently, and it was someone that I'd known for a while, and they asked me to be on the podcast to talk about, how do you get onto podcasting? And so I had sent her my bio, my image. I have a guest profile sheet that we put together for our guests, which got all the information on there. And I actually sent her a previous presentation that I'd done on the subject, all in an email saying, here's some collateral for you. After the podcast had been recorded, at the end of it, she said, this was the easiest podcast I've ever done, because you sent me all that information and I came up with my questions just like that. Bang, bang, bang. I didn't have to go back and forth or think about it too much. It just came easily because I'd provided all the information. So the more information you can provide, the easier you make it for the host, and they will remember that. They'll be going, oh, I'll have that person back again, because they made my job easier. And, hosts have got all this podcast production stuff to do behind the scenes as well. So if you make it easy for them, they'll say, yes, please come back. Also follow up. Like, if they haven't said yes straight away, just, how you going? Did you get my email? Kind of be casual at first, and then, don't be too stalkerish, but, make sure you do follow up. Make it easy. Send an outline of what you want to present. So give some ideas of topics that you could talk about or something, and, what you would talk about and what value you would add. And then repeat. keep going until someone says yes, and then, you know, you get the ball rolling. So just keep going. And sometimes, you know, hosts won't respond because they've got, you know, podcasting as well as running their other business, or, you know, they might say yes, but they don't have a vacancy for a few months because they, you know, have a big lead time. So yeah, don't be discouraged if they don't respond. Like, just keep going, keep asking.
Keith said bribe them with free donuts because that's his business.
Awesome. Keith, would you like to come on my podcast?
You can talk about donuts and sheep.
Yes. Oh God, that would be an awesome conversation. Who knows where that would go? Awesome. Have we got any other questions, Terry?
No, not yet.
Awesome. So I was just, my last slide is next step. So that's just the strategy call. And then our website is www.expertsonair.fm if you want to go and check us out and learn anything more about the world of podcasting.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mel. You know, the biggest thing with that is that so many people out there are perceived to be competing against each other. I don't like the word competition because I think you can collaborate. Mm-hmm. But like you said, the power of podcast is very much about being seen as an expert in an area for whatever it is. So if I look at the example of what I do as a business coach and trainer, could be very, very broad, but I can niche it right down depending on who I'm talking to. Mm-hmm. And that can be just for the sake of just say a program I'm running. It could be a module in that program. So it could be that I've got a business 8 steps to creating cash flow in your business. And one of the modules is around identity, for example. Mm-hmm. And therefore that's what I'm happy to speak on in a podcast. So there's so many different things that people could speak on and add value to a market and build that credibility. And it is just one strategy to consider. And it's one that I believe, like Mel and I were saying before, it's such a buzzword now. It's getting such traction that it's going to overtake so many other things. But at the moment, it's the best time to really get in when, you know, they haven't got millions and millions and millions of podcasts to listen to and become known as an expert in the earlier stages. So awesome strategy. And I can't wait for my interview coming up.
Yay!
Now. Finally, it takes me this long to actually book the appointment, but
we'll get there.
We get there. Without any doubt, like everyone should be considering in some way, shape or form how they could use this strategy. And, you know, I always say it's like you can try and work things out for yourself, but that in some respects that can waste time where you could get it happening by just going to people who are already doing it. And I know Mel and Brett, you know, obviously you guys are doing this together with your different strengths. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I definitely recommend that everyone does connect in some way, shape or form with you guys. But what I would love to offer, as I said in the beginning, is that you are so kindly offering this 20-minute strategy call with someone who has stayed on right to the end, which pretty much we've had a couple of people that have had to go for different reasons, but they always communicate, Mel.
Awesome.
So let me just double check if there's any.
I think Michelle's got one question there. What's the best way for sharing the links afterwards, in a post or in the comments?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I missed that one. I didn't see the question mark. I was looking for the obvious
question. Various different ways. So, you know, within on your social media as a post, you know, you can tag the host. You can comment when the host shares it on theirs. You know, share it in Facebook groups that you think would be interested in the content. So yeah, all different ways that you can do it, but whatever makes sense for you and that's not too time consuming. So when we book people through the booking agency as a guest, we create some social media collateral for them and some text and a little audiogram, which will, you know, you see those little audio files, and we create that for every interview that they have, and so they can just cut and paste that and put it on their social media. So we try and make it as easy as possible, and some hosts will create that for you as well, usually in their branding, and then you can go and create it in your branding as well and post it everywhere. So there's all different ways, but just make sure you do share it in some shape or form.
Perfect. Thanks, Mel. All right. Everyone is saying thank you. You can probably read it all now yourself.
I know, I can see the
so I'm going to get Mandy just to announce who is our winner of the session with...
do a drum roll.
Yeah. Michelle Moore. Wow.
Woo! Yay.
Yay. That's awesome. And I did notice a message from Michelle saying, how do I get on? How do I get on? Anyway, she found it and got on. And it was so worth it, Michelle.
Lucky.
So please, it is you that is getting this opportunity. And it doesn't mean just because you didn't win it, doesn't mean that you shouldn't connect and still have the opportunity. You know, you never know what value you can add to Mel's podcast as well. So on that note, we are on time pretty much.
Woohoo, that's a miracle for us too.
Yeah, I know. It is for you and I. Definitely, we could go forever. You can tell we spend a lot of time together. So thank you everyone for showing up again and trusting us in this journey. We love to bring the best of the best to you guys, and I always believe that the connections that I've got are very much that, as you would agree with Mel and what she's offering to you all. And next webinar is with Chandrish Parla. Mel, you would have known, yeah, what a treat, hey? So he's a guy that's going to do a bit more of what Mel used to work in the industry of the IT and bringing that more to the forefront. For those of you that do know the spectrum levels, Roger James Hamilton is a blue level on the spectrum, which is right up that towards the top, and so is Chandrish. So Chandrish is someone that has built many very successful businesses. He's got the best strategies to be able to support, and I'm super excited to bring him along too. Maybe Mel, you might even want to come and listen into that one as well.
I would love to, and he's such a super nice person.
He is. He's just, and actually I met him in iLab as well, because him and I have run about 3 programs together over there as well. So that's where all the good people hang out.
Absolutely.
So thanks again, Mel, so much for that. I really appreciate it. Thanks to my amazing team are all in the background backing, making sure that we get the production right and the recordings are done.
Yeah, because that's not our strong point.
Yeah. And we'll see you all soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Bye.